Tom jolted awake to the deafening silence. Something was terribly wrong. Where once the steady, rhythmic hum of his farm's irrigation system had been the soundtrack of early morning life, now there was only an eerie void. Bleary-eyed and heart-pounding, he stumbled to the window and peered out over his property. His breath caught in his throat as he saw that his beloved wooden fence, the one that had delineated his family's land for decades, was nowhere to be found. In its place, only a ragged gap in the landscape remained, a gaping wound in the boundary of his home. For Tom, that fence was more than just a barrier. It was a living memory of his father's legacy, a symbol of hard work and tradition that had withstood storms and time. And now, in one careless act, someone had cut it down without so much as a word of permission. The violation stung deeply, igniting a fire of indignation in his chest. How could anyone be so callous as to trespass on his property and erase a piece of his history? Determination surged through Tom as he began to formulate a plan. He wasn't about to let this theft stand without consequence. Instead of mourning the loss of his old fence, he decided to transform the very space it once occupied into a bold statement of defiance. Drawing on the rugged beauty of his land and a deep-rooted love for all things wild, Tom resolved to create a new barrier, a wall, not of wood or stone, but of 200 spiky, resilient cacti. As the last hues of twilight faded into night, Tom set his plan into motion. He envisioned a living fortress that would not only protect his property, but also serve as a constant reminder that his land was not to be trifled with. Each cactus, with its prickly armor and hardy disposition, would represent his resolve to fight back against any further encroachments. And when his neighbors learned of his unusual countermeasure, they'd see that creativity and self-reliance were his true weapons, far more formidable than any piece of lumber ever could be. With resolve hardening like the desert rock he admired, Tom knew that this was his moment to reclaim what was rightfully his. Tonight, his property's new guardian would rise, a living wall that would stand as a testament to the enduring spirit of his family legacy and a warning to anyone who dared violate his boundaries again. Tom T.J. Johnson had grown up on his family's land in Dry Creek Valley, a sprawling expanse of rugged terrain and sun-baked fields in the heart of the Southwest. Dry Creek Valley was a place where tradition ran deep and self-reliance was not just admired but essential. His father had built the original wooden fence by hand, a sturdy boundary that marked the edge of their property and symbolized decades of hard work and perseverance. Over the years, that fence had witnessed countless family gatherings, long summer evenings, and the quiet dignity of a life lived in harmony with the land. In stark contrast to the wild, natural beauty of Dry Creek Valley lay the modern encroachments of suburban development. Neighbors in the newly established gated community of Desert Springs prided themselves on their immaculate lawns, geometric landscapes, and strict adherence to Homeowners Association (HOA) guidelines. At the helm of enforcing these rigid standards was Karen Miller, widely known throughout Desert Springs as HOA Karen. In her early 50s and forever clad in sharp business attire, Karen patrolled the neighborhood with a clipboard and a smartphone, on a never-ending mission to stamp out any deviation from the prescribed uniformity. Karen's methods were draconian. Every slight infraction, a hedge that was a little too wild, a mailbox that wasn't the correct shade, was met with swift fines and stern warnings. To her, every piece of property was part of a grand canvas that had to be painted with the same brush. And when it came to Tom's farm stand and his beloved fence, she had made it her personal crusade to ensure that everything fit within her narrow vision of order. Tom, however, was a man of the land. He valued authenticity and the freedom to live by his own rules. His farm stand was a labor of love, a modest market where he sold fresh produce, homemade preserves, and handcrafted goods that told the story of his heritage. Every harvest was a celebration of the Southwest's bounty, and every piece of his property was imbued with memories of his father's legacy. For Tom, the fence was not merely a boundary. It was a symbol of his identity, a constant reminder of where he came from and what he stood for. When Tom discovered that his cherished fence had been cut down without permission, it wasn't just a loss of property. It was a direct assault on his family's legacy and his right to manage his land as he saw fit. The shock of the theft was compounded by the audacity of the act, and it spurred him into action. He knew that if he allowed this violation to go unchallenged, it would signal to everyone that his property, and by extension, his independence, could be disrespected without consequence. Thus, with a deep-seated determination and a touch of creative rebellion, Tom resolved to replace the missing fence with something that was uniquely his own, a wall of 200 hardy cacti, chosen not only for their resilience, but also for their striking, untamed beauty. This living wall would be a natural fortress, a constant, prickly reminder that his land was fiercely protected. In the heart of Dry Creek Valley, where the spirit of the land was unyielding, Tom's new creation would stand as a bold defiance against any future encroachment. The next morning, as dawn broke over the parched land of Dry Creek Valley, Tom walked outside to survey the damage. The space where his fence had once proudly stood was now an empty void, a wound in the very edge of his property. His heart sank as he examined the remnants. A few scattered planks, a rusted nail here and there, and the unmistakable sign of deliberate vandalism. It was clear that whoever had cut down the fence had done so without any regard for the legacy of his family. Tom's first instinct was to document everything. He snapped photos, recorded videos with his smartphone, and even wrote down the time and date of the incident. He knew that this evidence would be crucial if he ever decided to take legal action. But beyond the practical steps, a deep surge of indignation and creative energy surged within him. He recalled all the fines he'd received over the years for his nonconformist choices, fines that Karen had handed down like a self-appointed judge. Now, this blatant violation was the tipping point. He began speaking with his neighbors, some of whom had witnessed similar intrusions on their property. Stories emerged of other homeowners who had felt the sting of unauthorized alterations imposed by the HOA. And soon Tom discovered that the fence-cutting incident was not an isolated act of vandalism, but part of a broader pattern of disrespect for private property rights. The community was growing restless, and Tom's resolve was bolstered by the solidarity he felt from those who believed in the sanctity of individual land. With his evidence in hand, Tom turned to his trusted companion, his old pickup truck, and drove to the local hardware store. There, he purchased an astonishing 200 baby cacti, each one carefully selected for its toughness and unique, spiky allure. Over the next several days, he painstakingly arranged these cacti along the very line where his fence had stood. Each cactus was planted with precision, spaced evenly to form an impenetrable wall, a living barrier that would not only reclaim his property line, but also serve as a powerful statement of defiance. The work was grueling. Tom spent long, sun-baked hours digging small holes, carefully positioning each cactus and filling the ground with nutrient-rich soil to ensure their survival. Neighbors watched in astonishment as the new fence began to take shape, a wall of green, prickly sentinels rising from the earth, each one a testament to Tom's determination and resourcefulness. In quiet moments, he would pause to admire the contrast. Where once there was a uniform, mass-produced fence, there now grew a living, breathing monument to the wild spirit of Dry Creek Valley. Even as Tom labored under the relentless sun, word of his rebellion spread throughout the community. Supportive texts, phone calls, and messages flooded in from neighbors who cheered him on. "That's the spirit, Tom," one resident texted. "We're tired of the HOA telling us how to live." The online community rallied behind him, and soon local blogs and social media posts began to chronicle his bold act of defiance. But Tom knew that his struggle was far from over. He anticipated that the culprits behind the fence's destruction would eventually try to justify their actions, or worse, that the HOA, under the influence of overzealous enforcers like Karen, might try to fine him yet again for unauthorized modifications. The living cactus wall was not only a reclaiming of his property, but also a preemptive strike, a vivid, unmistakable reminder that his land was his own, and that any future trespass would be met with an unyielding, natural defense. As the cactus wall grew taller and more imposing with each passing day, the tension in the community mounted. The digital evidence of his work, shared widely on social media, ignited debates about property rights and individual freedom versus the overreach of centralized authority. Tom's determination, fueled by both personal loss and communal support, was paving the way for a showdown that would soon force the HOA and its enforcers to reconsider their tactics. In the days following the completion of the cactus wall, the transformation of Tom's property became a symbol of resistance throughout Dry Creek Valley. The living wall of 200 cacti stood as a bold declaration against the unauthorized fence cutting, a wild, vibrant barrier that contrasted sharply with the cookie-cutter boundaries imposed by the HOA. Social media exploded with posts and images of the cactus wall. Hashtags such as hashtag cacti for freedom, hashtag fence revenge, and hashtag my land rules trended locally, rallying residents who felt stifled by the rigid enforcement of community standards. Local news outlets soon caught wind of the story. Reporters arrived at Dry Creek Valley to capture the surreal sight of a fence replaced not with a new wooden barrier, but with a living wall of cacti. One anchor remarked, "It's a striking example of grassroots resistance, an innovative, if unconventional, response to an egregious violation of property rights." Interviews with neighbors revealed widespread support for Tom's actions. Many recounted similar incidents where the HOA's overreach had infringed upon their own rights, and the cactus wall quickly became a rallying symbol of defiance and creative self-expression. Within the HOA, internal tensions began to rise. Emergency meetings were convened, and leaked memos hinted at a growing divide among board members. Some staunchly defended the need for uniformity and strict enforcement, arguing that deviations from community standards were detrimental to property values. Others, however, started to question the heavy-handed tactics that had led to the destruction of a family fence, tactics that now seemed out of step with the evolving values of the community. When a homeowner takes a stand, it forces us to re-examine what truly matters. One board member was quoted as saying in a leaked discussion, "Karen Miller, the force behind the original fence cutting, was increasingly isolated. Neighbors who had once feared her wrath now began to openly criticize her actions." On community forums and social media, posts surfaced mocking her inability to control nature, posts that depicted her as a petty enforcer unable to comprehend the raw power of the land. One viral post compared the cactus wall to an impenetrable fortress of freedom, a stark reminder that individual rights trumped any arbitrary rule. Tom continued to document the saga. He posted time-lapse videos showing the cactus wall growing day by day, each spike and succulent leaf a visual metaphor for resilience and independence. His updates, laced with candid reflections on the importance of property rights, resonated deeply with the community. "Our land is our legacy," he wrote in one post, "and no one has the right to tear it down or remake it in their own image." The digital momentum swelled, and local activists began organizing rallies to demand that the HOA board address the broader issues of arbitrary enforcement and abuse of power. As the backlash against the HOA grew, pressure mounted on the board to take decisive action. A final public hearing was scheduled to address the controversies that had rocked Dry Creek Valley, a moment when the future direction of community governance would be decided. In the days leading up to the hearing, residents gathered in public squares, distributed flyers, and shared passionate messages of support for Tom and his bold stand. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the collective determination to reclaim the community from oppressive oversight. Late one evening, as Tom reviewed the final details of his digital dossier, a comprehensive compilation of security footage, photographs, and testimonials, he received a call from a longtime neighbor. "Tom, we can't let them get away with this," she said, her voice resolute. "If they fine you for your cactus wall, then they're sending a message that our rights don't matter." Her words echoed the growing sentiment among residents that the fight for property rights was not just Tom's battle. It was a battle for every person who cherished the freedom to live on their own terms. In that moment, Tom realized that the cactus wall was more than just a countermeasure against a single act of vandalism. It had become a symbol of the community's spirit and the enduring fight for individuality. The stakes had grown higher, and every shared post, every rallying cry on social media, reaffirmed that if the HOA board did not reform its oppressive policies, the outcry would only grow louder. The stage was set for the final showdown, a public hearing that promised to be a turning point in the battle for property rights in Dry Creek Valley. The community's collective voice, bolstered by undeniable digital evidence and unwavering solidarity, was poised to force the HOA board to confront the consequences of its actions. As the night deepened and the digital petition reached tens of thousands of signatures, it became clear that this was a watershed moment, a time when the balance between community order and individual freedom would be redefined once and for all. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning at the Dry Creek Valley Community Center, where the final public hearing was about to commence. The boardroom was packed with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of impassioned residents, all gathered to determine the future of property rights and community governance in our corner of the valley. With an air of quiet determination, Councilwoman Rebecca Moore stepped up to the podium, her eyes scanning the expectant crowd. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage of the fence's destruction, detailed photographs of our new cactus wall, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Moore began, her voice calm, yet resolute. It is abundantly clear that the unauthorized removal of private property and the subsequent attempt to impose arbitrary rules was not only a gross violation of individual rights, but also an abuse of power that undermines the very foundations of our community. Our residents have spoken, and they demand that we protect the sanctity of private property and creative expression. A heavy silence fell over the room as Moore continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident. Furthermore, we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such egregious overreach to occur, and we will implement new guidelines that guarantee the protection of every resident's property rights. Today's vote is not merely about a fence or a cactus wall. It is a resounding declaration that in Dry Creek Valley, every homeowner's right to live, work, and express themselves freely must be upheld. Her words resonated powerfully, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a revered community advocate, renowned for his steadfast commitment to property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should have to live in fear of arbitrary enforcement or see their heritage trampled upon by those who claim to serve the community. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that our collective voice will no longer be silenced by petty acts of vandalism and tyranny. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with a thunderous round of applause, uniting the room in a shared call for justice. Following his stirring address, a senior officer from the local property oversight office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports that confirmed the legality of my actions and the unconstitutionality of the fence's unauthorized removal. The evidence was irrefutable. My new wall of 200 cacti was a lawful, innovative solution to protect my property, and the demolition of my original fence was a direct violation of my rights. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible for the overreach, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Moore concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Dry Creek Valley, a community where individual rights are cherished, where creativity is celebrated, and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and ensure that no one can impose their will upon us without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live and express ourselves without fear. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and creative freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Dry Creek Valley. The days of arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights and innovative expression was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Dry Creek Valley underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread like wildfire throughout local media and across social networks, igniting fervent debates about property rights, creative freedom, and the role of community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Dry Creek Valley" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive action taken to uphold every homeowner's right to manage their property as they saw fit. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #CreativeFreedom trended widely, reinforcing the collective resolve to stand against arbitrary interference. Town hall meetings and community forums witnessed record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where creativity and independence were not suppressed but celebrated. Neighbors who had long been intimidated by the stringent rules of the HOA now spoke proudly about their right to live authentically, unbound by bureaucratic constraints. "Our land is our legacy, and we must defend it fiercely," one impassioned resident declared, his words echoing through the crowded room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Dry Creek Valley would always be a community where individual expression and freedom reigned supreme. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint would be scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again suffer under the weight of arbitrary fines. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the community's renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to empower residents further. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and to promote an understanding of how creative expression enriches our community. When we unite, our voices are powerful enough to challenge even the most outdated systems, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring a wave of collective action. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to replace a stolen fence with a living wall of 200 cacti was not merely a matter of retribution. It was a declaration of independence, a bold affirmation of the right to express myself and protect my heritage. Neighbors, who had long been silenced by the fear of punitive fines and intrusive rule enforcement, found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance. The digital evidence that showcased my cactus wall became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and creative freedom were inviolable. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when the community stands united for justice. Her influence rapidly diminished as records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the urgent need for reform and the perils of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Dry Creek Valley, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the soft glow of a setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, freedom, and property rights was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches filled the air with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative spirit in our community. Councilwoman Moore proclaimed, her voice resonating with unwavering determination. The resounding standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our shared commitment to protect our freedoms and ensure that no one could ever abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Dry Creek Valley, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how unauthorized fence cutting was met with a living wall of 200 cacti, a bold, natural testament to the power of individual resistance, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that personal freedom and property rights should always prevail. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Dry Creek Valley, truth, justice, and creative expression would forever flourish. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Dry Creek Valley would forever be a place where ingenuity, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.